So when they asked me to submit some talks, I submitted 2 talks. I submitted a technical and this one about the grants committee because I figured I could do this one in my sleep. And then they accepted both of them, which I was not expecting. So thank you for showing up. I think exactly half of the people in the room are probably very familiar with what I'm going to talk about. Hopefully this will be interesting enough, compelling enough for 20 minutes. Feel free to stop me with questions. Because there's not a whole lot of content here. Just a little bit about me. There's my contact information. I had meant to reverse the communities here because for this talk, the TPF community is more important. I specifically put it in as community based on the talks yesterday. There's a lot of different groups inside the overall Perl community, and these are the 2 that I'm involved with. I also put my day job on there because it really has absolutely nothing to do with any of the work that I do with Perl. So I just wanted to call out that contrast. Jim actually talked a lot about this. Other languages, Golang, Swift, there's a lot of languages that have corporate sponsorships. So it's easier for them to get tasks done because they can hire people and throw developers at it, and we're just basically all volunteers. So TPF is a nonprofit, handles donation, legal issues like copyright, financials, but we don't own Perl, we don't own the community, we're just here to help. So the overall talk is about the grants committee. The first place where that process starts is with donations. So we get, I think, a substantial fraction of our TPF income from corporate donations. I actually just found out earlier today that previously the way the donations would work is there'd be repeat solicitations for particular events. So if they wanted to fund the conference, they would go out to donors and say, can you pay for this conference or this event? And I guess a few years ago, they switched to a model where now instead of sponsors supporting things that we do, they're supporting us. And then we have a little more leeway in terms of how that gets allocated. It makes it a little smoother of a process. Individual donors, I know a lot of people have a project that they care about, they'll kick in a few bucks. If you do that, a lot of companies do matching. So be sure if you are donating, if you're trying to encourage other people to donate, that they set up that corporate match, because every little bit helps. In terms of dispersing the money, there's basically, as far as grant-related things, there's 2 ways that happens right now. One is the funds, and this is like the Perl 5 Core Maintenance Fund, for example. The way these are managed right now, it's currently by the board. It's not actually the grants committee, so I don't actually touch any of those. That's something that may change in the future as we try to figure out how we can all more effectively volunteer our time. So the funds for this go into a specific bucket. When somebody donates money, they can say, I want this to go to this fund. These tend to be more long-running. I think the Perl 5 fund has been going on for 3 years. It's been many years. I'm looking at Jim like he might know the answer to that question. Longer than that. Okay. So for those grants, there's usually some technical expertise required. For the 5, you have to your work, basically your proposal has to be approved by the people that work on P5P. Just as an example. And a lot of the work that gets done there is stuff that I mentioned were volunteers. Even the developers are volunteers, obviously. There's some stuff that just nobody wants to work on. It's not rewarding. So by having some funding associated with that, it helps us act a little bit more like those languages that do have a corporate sponsor. So on the opposite side of the funds are the grants. These are managed by the committee. So this is the part that I actually do. We have an annual budget that's set up by the board. These grants tend to be a lot shorter in duration. They might be a couple of months long for the average. There's very specific deliverables. But the interesting thing about the grants is that these are usually self-selected. It's not like anybody is saying, here's 50 things that we think need to get done. These are things that people are passionate about that they're going to work on. As far as that process goes, there's a bi-monthly review of proposals that have been submitted. Those proposals, like I said, come in from all across the community. There should be information in there about what is it you're trying to do? How are you going to do it? Why are you the person to work on this grant? What are your deliverables? And the more detail you can provide there in terms of what the impact is going to be, and how you're going to go about the work, that'll all help as part of the review process. These proposals get posted. There's a chance for everybody in the community to comment on them, to voice concerns, maybe point out some information that the proposer didn't know. Once it goes through that community review period, and actually there's a round that's going through that right now, and basically this evening, I'm going to take the ones that are out, posted on the site for review, and put together a mailing to everybody on the committee, linking to the articles, linking to the comments, and then calling for a vote. And we'll have a week for everybody on the committee to review what those look like. And I'm looking at you two, and everybody puts a numeric vote in. It's either no, an abstention, or like 1 to 5 to rank them. Once the voting happens, grants can be voted approved, and then we have to have a separate thing that decides whether or not we're going to fund them. So approval is basically the quality of the grant, and then funding is, do we have any money left? So that we have to manage that as we go along through the year with our budget. The grants committee manages the running grants, and this is basically a super low-level project management task. Are you doing any work? Yes, you are. Okay, the grant's still going. Great. There are rules about if you have a long-running grant where there's been no progress or no reporting, then we're going to kill the grant. It's dead. We try to provide a little leeway because, again, everybody here traditionally is coming from a volunteering background. We know real life gets in the way sometimes, but that's part of that. What do we got? So this question comes up a lot. What can we do to get the grants? Like, you have something you're super passionate about. How do you get that in front of the grants committee and get a yes vote? And here's just a bunch of questions that we consider. There's no formula. Every person on the committee, all of them have a long history in the community, and they're basically using these questions, and they have their own set of criteria, no doubt. But I talked briefly about this. What's the cost of the grant versus what we're getting out of it? What's the type of grant? We tend to fund development projects a lot. Documentation projects are a close second. We tend not to get in front of travel or event grants. There's other places that you can go through the board to book that sort of thing. And actually, speaking of that, there's a little bit of confusion, I think, in terms of what stuff is going through the grants committee, what stuff's going through the board. It's a little bit of a mess. So some of that, if you have a question about that sort of thing, feel free to reach out to me or somebody on the board, and we can try to point you in the right direction. So other questions, what's the target audience? Who's going to benefit from the work that the grant is doing? What was the feedback? I just found out today, for example, that we have a currently running grant that might actually be duplicating some effort that was already available that nobody knew about. So the community feedback process is the time to let us know that, and that we I think have to do a slightly better job there of soliciting that feedback. What's the history of the applicant? We've had 1 or 2 grants where somebody has submitted something, the grant failed for whatever reason, personal life came up, and then basically got a resubmittal of that grant, basically to start over. And I'm going to tell you that's going to be marked down a little bit in terms of whether or not we're going to vote on that. But again, every grant is considered separately. And then what is our budget that's left? That doesn't factor into the acceptance, but it is technically possible to get a grant accepted. Everybody's excited about it, and we can't pay you to do it because we don't have any money left, which goes back to donations. So, and there's like I said, every proposal is considered on its own.
Well,
Yeah.
There's a process to, Will can come to the board and say, this round, we got some really good money, we'd love to have them come through. Can you help get some more money too? So
Sweet, that's good to know, because I didn't know
there you
that.
go, so now everybody learns something.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And I think that just highlights another thing. A TPF is just a volunteer organization. It's not like we have regular running meetings to figure out how everything, and actually we just had one over lunch, which is the first one I've been to, and I hope we keep doing that. Just keeping the lines of communication open amongst ourselves and then out to the community as well. So there are, I think the grants committee is one of the few subcommittees that has a charter. Like, we have rules of operation. Part of that is dealing with voting on grants. Part of that is how many members we're allowed to have and how we solicit new members, or how we onboard new members. So we actually, due to some recent shuffling, there's one vacancy for a voting grant committee member. So if you're looking to volunteer your time, that's something that that might be an option. I described the process a little bit, but basically you're going to be reviewing proposals every 2 months, and then providing your honest feedback on why you like this proposal or don't. We can always use more grant managers. I can tell you the last grant that came through, I ended up being the grant manager because I couldn't happen to find one in time. And that, like I said, that's really low-level project management. You're just basically poking the person with a stick just to make sure that they're alive. So slightly more than that, but that's the minimum that we're looking for.
Do you get a special stick?
If you need one, I will look into that. I'm sure we can get some sponsors to give us some special poking sticks.
There's an implied stick because there's the money at the other end.
Right.
So I guess that's like carrot.
Carrot, yeah. Yeah, if you're using money as a stick, you're probably doing it wrong.
You should use the money to buy a stick.
So, and I didn't update this slide, and I meant to, between the lunch meeting that I said we had. There's actually a lot of volunteer opportunities, not necessarily on the grants committee, but in the TPF as a whole. We talked about migrations of some of the websites. So we need people who are like, I don't know if webmaster is still a job title, but basically that level of expertise. Migrating between content delivery systems. We need, I think we have some marketing folks, but I imagine we could always use more. People who are willing to learn how to use the customer relationship management tool that we're now signed up with. So we have a new way of processing donations. So there's a lot of, I used the word unglamorous before. I think that's a good one. There's a lot of, I guess maybe for me would be boring work. Maybe somebody's very excited about marketing. And actually, I do actually know somebody in the community who is excited about marketing, so I'll forward him to you. But there's always an opportunity to help out. So whether that's you personally volunteering or somehow getting your company involved, if you guys are heavy users of Perl, this is one of the discussions we had. Do we need volunteers more or do we need money more? And I think we ended up basically saying both. Yes. So any way that you can help out there would be great. Actually, I'm glad Will is here. One of the things that we need to do a better job of when we reject a grant, we need to make sure that we give some better feedback. And we try to do that. We aren't always able to in terms of the feedback that we have.
Can I raise my hand?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So just a moment ago, you said that there's a opening for one new member on the voting committee.
Yep.
And that the job of that member is to give your honest feedback of whether or not a grant deserves to be approved or funded.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll also quote you here. Unfortunately, there is no guarantee of feedback in the
Yep.
voting process, which you tagged my name there, and I was obviously quite unhappy about being rejected when I requested feedback.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly I can tell you part of that,
What
Will.
you just said really is in direct contradiction to
Right.
what you had told me before.
Yeah. So that's why I put this bullet point on here, because it's not something that is part of the official process. Like I said, we have a charter. There's a bunch of rules. That's not one of the rules. So we try to do that. And what I am trying to do here is to make that more official, so that in the future, we can give that feedback that you're looking for.
So that would require updating the charter presumably.
Yep.
And what is the process
No,
for that?
no, I don't think.
Well, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be, but,
The reason that the grants committee needs a charter is because they can spend money.
okay,
Basically. So there had to be a way to deputize people that were not board members to spend money.
okay,
Everything that's in the charter is basically around the rules that say that people who are not board members, these are the rules by which
Mhm.
these people can authorize money going out of TPF. That's all
Yeah.
it has to do. There's nothing to do with feedback. So
Okay.
it would not require any change in the charter.
Oh, that's good.
As far as feedback, there's going to be stuff, and this is, I mean, it's not exactly the same as an HR process, but there are elements that are similar in the sense that there's discussion that happens. For there to be frank discussion, there's not
Right.
always, a guarantee that all of that frank discussion on the list is private is necessarily going to be something that's going to be shared. There can be
Yeah.
many things that can be discussed.
Oh, sure,
So-
but I was denied any feedback whatsoever when I requested it, which is
right.
different.
Well, certainly, Will, part of that is because you didn't request the feedback, you demanded the feedback. So, and I get that you're upset.
Several emails with an increasing level of demand to them, yes.
Mhm.
And I still feel like I would like to get that feedback, but hey, if you're gonna at least change it in the future, great. Just
Yeah.
tell me how you plan to go about doing that, because it's not gonna be in the charter, so
Yeah.
what's your actual plan?
So part of that is going to just be instructions to the folks on the committee. Make sure that, and we, like Jim said, we do this to some extent now. There is discussion, and I do ask people, and I'm sure there's been an email about this on the list. When you're providing feedback, let me know if this is something that I can post on the list. And for that round, there was nothing that met that criteria. So there was nothing to provide you there. And
Well,
so
if
the,
there are secret reasons that are not publicly consumable for anybody's grant being denied, I think
Mhm.
there should be at least some public reasons also presented, alongside that.
So-
When there's nothing at all provided, it looks kind of shady, like you guys have a backroom meeting that you don't want people to know what's going on, and I'm sure that's not your intention.
well, again, part of this is there is private discussion,
Yes.
right? So when there is public feedback, we do provide that. So, and we'll try to do a better job of that in the future. But just like there's no guarantee that an individual grant is going to get accepted, there's no guarantee that there's going to be feedback there. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the time is running.
Okay.
Can we finish
Yeah. So,
and take it over?
yeah. Other things that have come up. Better integration with the sponsors. There's some directed work that the sponsors might want to get done. We don't know if that's going to be through the grants committee, through funds. Part of that needs to just be an open discussion with the sponsors about what sort of work they want to see done in the community. So like I said, that might not even go through the grants committee. I talked briefly about this. There's the work on the funds, which is similar to what the managers of individual grants are doing, but right now that's being handled by Makoto. So that might get shuffled around as well. I think, so we've probably eaten a lot of that time already, but certainly yeah, go ahead.
So let's say you have 10 grants you give out a year, and 5 just fail for whatever reason.
Yep.
As a nonprofit, are there issues with, like, you therefore have to carry that money over a tax year?
So that's actually a question for the treasurer. And I think in the past, what we have done is if a grant failed, we tried to keep that money in the pool to apply to whatever the next grant was. But the last discussion that I remember having with Dan is that basically that money is going back into the general budget. And if we need to have a separate discussion about, okay, new stuff is coming in and we need to fund that, that is separate from what happens to the grants that didn't work.
I was just curious if, like, there was any maybe pressure to find additional grants to fund that year. It sounds like there's not.
Not from not like a business would
Yeah.
worry about, like a sort of tax person. But the other challenge that the grants committee has, so there's that one, where one can not, the person just says, it turns out I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
Right.
So they just cancel it. The other, I think probably more common case is that it takes them longer than they thought, which can also even be quite a bit longer than they thought, which can extend from one year to another. So
Right.
that even though the money is allocated, the just a question of, when it was paid out and when it was accepted, things like that. So
Yeah.
try to juggle everything. Obviously, we're going to pay out any grant that was accepted. And
Right.
approved, so there's not an issue with that. But yeah.
I think Dan would probably be happy if we did it the same year that but
It would be cleaner
Right.
for everybody, but we know that it doesn't work.
Right.
That's probably more often.
we do have a spreadsheet somewhere with a list of all of the running grants and what the final status was so that Dan can work through that. So, all right. Yeah?
I'm trying to figure out
Mhm.
where do the ideas for the grants come from? Like, if I want to do something, I would say, like, I would come up with an idea and then
Mhm.
submit it for a grant?
Yeah.
Or is there a way that there are grants for wanted things?
Those were the bounties that I was alluding to there. We have, there is some suggestions out there. They're probably 4 years old at this point. So honestly, we probably just need to get rid of those.
You just found it earlier today.
Pearlfoundation.org, then there's a link, grant ideas.
Yep.
So
So,
like, if I do one of those grant ideas, then I submit a grant request, and then I might get it, and then I can start working on it.
yep. So, and again, it would be, you'd put in a proposal. That proposal is going to get evaluated. The fact that it was one of the suggestions would probably be taken into account. We find if there's a project you're excited about, you're probably going to have your best luck with that rather than finding some other project. So just something to think about. So there's another round. We're in the middle of a round right now. It's every 2 months. And honestly, it takes most of the 2 months, I think, for us to get through it these days. The next round is going to start sometime in July. So look at newspearlfoundation.org, and there'll be a blog post putting out that call for new grants. So,
Yeah, time is up.
excellent. Okay. Thank you.